Have you ever felt a hug without anyone touching you? Sometimes it comes in the form of a scent, a thread, or silence. Welcome to the channel, Grandma's Diaries. Here, every story is stitched with memory and faith, and every memory has the power to heal what we didn't even know was hurting. Subscribe now, not just to follow a channel, but so you won't forget to feel. Because right now, somewhere deep inside you, there's a longing that just wants to be remembered. Now take a deep breath, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a mending of the soul. Have you ever been hugged without anyone opening their arms? There are gestures that speak, stitches that embrace, and silences that only grandmothers know how to translate. Now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and come with me, because some memories aren't told, they're stitched. In my childhood, silence was a language. I spoke little, listened a lot, and carried in my chest a question I didn't know how to ask. We lived on a small farm. No neighbors nearby. No sound of cars. Just the clucking of hens, the wind, and my grandmother's sewing machine. It was a constant sound, hypnotic, that lulled my days like a song without lyrics. I'd spend hours sitting on the floor of the makeshift studio, watching scraps of fabric turn into dresses, quilts, aprons. My grandmother never asked why I was there. She knew. She knew I was looking for more than company. I was searching for meaning. She sewed with a peace I envied. Steady hands, calm eyes, as if every stitch was an answer. And without realizing it, she began to teach me without words. My grandmother never asked why I was sad, and yet she always knew, not because I told her with words, but because silence has weight. And she knew how to carry silences with the same lightness she used to straighten a crooked hem or thread a needle without missing. I'd come home from school, drop my backpack in a corner, sit at the table without wanting to eat. I wouldn't look anyone in the eye. And she, pretending to be distracted while washing lettuce or stirring cornmeal, already knew, want to help me fold the fabrics. That's how it began. A simple invitation. No insistence, no pressure. I'd say yes with a slow gesture, and she'd already place a cloth in my lap. As we folded, she'd start telling stories about the time she got lost on her way to the market and ended up in the neighbor's yard, about the cat that ate the bread dough while it was rising, about how she was left speechless seeing a calf being born. And without realizing it, I'd already be smiling. But it wasn't just the cloth. It was the touch. When she'd run her hand through my hair and tuck it behind my ear. When she'd gently touch my shoulder just to show she was there. When she'd hold my hand and say in a low voice, "It's okay." Not everything needs to be said. Some things we stitch with time. Those hands had invisible threads that stitched together what hurt in me. And I began to understand that true love doesn't always speak. Sometimes it just stays. The first time I embroidered a flower with her was after a loss. A schoolmate had moved to another city without saying goodbye. We were close. We shared snacks, laughter, and scribbled notebooks. Suddenly, he was gone, and no one really explained why. I was strange for days, silent, dragging my slippers around the house. No desire to play with my cousins. The sadness wasn't loud. It was tiny, like tangled thread. My grandmother noticed. The next afternoon, she called me, "Sit here. Today, you're going to learn the daisy stitch." She pulled out a piece of raw fabric, placed it in the hoop, and handed it to me. I held it with unsure hands. The thread was yellow, the needle light. She showed me the movement, the stitch that forms petals with a pull of thread. Each stitch, a petal. Each petal, a good memory. I embroidered slowly. The thread slid through the fabric with a soft sound, almost like a sigh. And while I worked, she told old stories about a dog that disappeared and returned a week later, a flower that bloomed in an unexpected place, a friendship that survived distance. We embroidered for hours, in silence. I made crooked petals, some out of place, but she didn't correct them. Our flowers grow a bit crooked sometimes too. That's what makes them beautiful. By the end of the afternoon, the cloth had a full yellow flower. I had a tear at the corner of my eye. And she, her hands resting over mine. That day I understood. The needle stitches more than fabric. It stitches our feelings too. And sometimes, when the words won't come, the embroidery speaks. I felt everything. I felt safe. I felt I didn't have to explain myself. I felt that there, silence was welcome. I remember one afternoon when I cried behind the chicken coop. My father had scolded me. I didn't understand why. The pain wasn't just in the body. It was in the soul, the part that just wanted to be seen. My grandmother found me. She didn't say a word. She sat next to me with a piece of fabric and a needle. "Shall we embroider?" That's all she said, and it was. We spent hours there, making flowers that didn't exist, mixing thread with tears, turning pain into beauty. The needle pierced the fabric and seemed to pull from me what I didn't know how to name. In my teenage years, I went silent for weeks. It wasn't rebellion. It was pain, a deep sadness I couldn't even explain. I hid in my room, pretended to study, but inside, it was just an unnamed emptiness. My grandmother noticed, but she never pressured me. She simply kept sewing. Sewed near me. Sewed as if she were trying to stitch something inside me too. One day, I came home with a pain in my chest I couldn't explain. It wasn't illness, or an injury, or even anger. It was a quiet sadness, the kind no one sees. I sat on the porch, head down, watching my slippers dangle at the tips of my toes. She came slowly out of the kitchen, sat beside me, with a piece of white fabric on her lap. She didn't say a word. She simply began to baste. The sound of the needle piercing the fabric was so soft it felt like breathing. I kept watching. After a few minutes, she handed the cloth to me. "Here, make a few stitches, just to fool time." I took the fabric without much interest, but the needle was already threaded. And since the gesture was simple, I started. First, the running stitch, then the back stitch. Then I tried making a crooked heart. She looked and smiled. When the heart's crooked inside, we stitch it outside. Maybe it'll straighten up. That fabric filled with tiny, scattered stitches. But they told my story. They were my diary without words. She kept sewing beside me. Glasses slipping down her nose, feet swaying gently. Sometimes she'd say, "This stitch is too tight. What are you afraid of?" This one's too loose. Trying to run away? This one, it's lovely. Looks lighter. And it was true. I was getting lighter. In the end, we folded the cloth, and she placed it in a box that smelled In the end, we folded the cloth, and she placed it in a box that smelled of coconut soap. She said, "Whenever you want, it'll be here." Fabric listens too, my dear, and it doesn't gossip. One day, I came home and saw on the bed a little blue cushion with my name embroidered in the center and a phrase just below, "Whenever you need, I'm here." Simple as that. No demands, no questions, just presence. And that's when I broke down. I cried like never before and ran to her. She hugged me without saying a word. And in that silence, I understood everything. She heard me with her soul, even when I couldn't get the words out. Since then, I've understood that fabric on the lap is a place of healing. And sometimes, the pain that doesn't fit into speech finds comfort in the palm of a hand, in the back and forth of a needle, in the firm touch of someone who knows that love is also sitting beside you and stitching silence. There were times I didn't need to say a word. My grandmother would look at me and just know. She could tell by the way I held the spoon at meals, by how I hung the towel after a shower, by the silence when she offered me a slice of cake. She never demanded explanations. She had a way of looking that was both a mirror and an embrace. I carried a knot in my chest, one of those no one can untie. School had been hard, an unfair teacher, a poorly done assignment, a mocking classmate. All of it becoming weight. She didn't ask anything. She took my hand and turned my palm upward. When the heart is tight, it spills into the fingers. She held my hand between hers. Her fingers were warm, firm, with thin skin and tiny calluses. Each callus, a stitch. Each line in her hand, a story I never needed to hear to understand. With the tip of her thumb, she traced paths on my palm, as if reading a map. Here, you keep your courage. Here, your sadness. Here, the fears you pretend not to have. I stayed quiet. Not because I didn't want to speak, but because I didn't need to. She took a scrap of blue fabric, placed it in my hand, and said, "Stitch anything on it. Doesn't matter what. Just let it out." I made a bunch of disconnected stitches. No logic, no beauty. And when I finished, she looked at it with tenderness. There, it's lighter now. And it was true. That piece of blue fabric became my silent therapy, and she, my first soul reader, who read with her hands, not her eyes. My grandmother was never one for writing letters, but she embroidered messages only I could read. One day, she gave me a small towel with my name embroidered. The letters were crooked, misaligned, but it was her way of saying, "You have a place." Another time, she embroidered flowers on a handkerchief that she always kept near my bed. Blue flowers, the same ones I used to doodle in the margins of my notebooks. Without me knowing, she noticed even my scribbles and turned them into care. I collected those embroideries like someone keeping secrets. I knew there were things there she couldn't say, but that she felt. Like when she stitched a tiny heart into the pocket of my winter coat. Without telling me, without showing me, I found it by chance on a cold morning. I cried right then and there because I understood. It was her way of saying, "Take my love with you." My grandmother carried a red thread in the pocket of her apron, wound around an old piece of cardboard. It was thicker than the others, a bit coarse, one of those that seemed to have gone through much water and much time. I never saw her sew with it, but it was always there, among buttons, her thimble, and her little patchwork pincushion. One day I asked, "Grandma, what's this thread for?" She stopped what she was doing, sat on the edge of the bed, and replied in a soft voice, "This thread here is a promise thread." I didn't understand at first. She laughed gently and explained, "When your grandfather left to work far away, I was terrified he'd get lost. The road was bad, the weather uncertain. So his mother taught me, slip a red thread into his pocket. Don't stitch it, just place it. It's a thread of return, of protection." And did it work? He came back, and I never stopped carrying one with me. From then on, I began to notice. When someone in the family got sick, she'd take a bit of the red thread, wrap it around her finger, tie a tiny knot, and leave it at the bedside. When one of my uncles went traveling, she'd tuck a small piece secretly into his shirt pocket. It was never for seeing, it was for feeling. One day, when I had to travel for a few days, she called me before "Here," she said, placing the folded red thread between my fingers. "It's not superstition, it's care." I kept it in my pocket, and during that time away from home, on hard days, all it took was touching the thread to remember. Some kinds of love stitch across distance with faith. One day, the sewing machine thread snapped 3 times in a row. My grandmother tried again, paused, tried again. Nothing. She sighed deeply. "Some days, even the thread refuses," she said. I laughed, but I understood she was talking about herself, because that day, she was quieter than usual. Her eyes were hollow, her hands shakier. I offered help. She shook her head, but held my hand. We sat there, in silence, holding hands. 2 generations, not sure how to open up, but knowing how to stay. After a while, she stood up slowly, gathered the fabrics, put away the threads. "Today, the stitching is with God," she said, and went to bed early. That night taught me that not every silence is absence. Sometimes, it's just the most human way to say, "I'm tired," and that's okay. After my grandmother passed away, the house sounded different. Everything was still in its place. The fabrics in the closet, the rocking chair in the corner, the apron hanging behind the door. But the silence was different. It wasn't just the absence of her voice. It was the lack of her touch, her gestures, the soft tapping of her fingers against fabric. For weeks, I avoided going into her room, but one rainy Sunday, I slowly pushed the door open and entered. The light from the window gently lit the bedspread she had embroidered herself. Little daisies with green stems, delicately scattered as if they had bloomed there naturally. At the center of the bed, a pillow, the one she always used behind her back while embroidering. I picked it up carefully. On the back, there was a small patch, stitched with blue thread using an invisible stitch. I recognized the stitch. It was hers. It was an old repair, but a firm one, barely noticeable. That's how she stitched the most important things, with delicacy, in places no one paid attention to. I knelt right there, with the pillow on my lap, and ran my fingers over the fabric. And then I understood. Her stitching was in everything, not just in the cloths, but in me. The way I set the table, the way I fold clothes, the way I welcome someone in silence. Everything carries her stitch. And there, holding that pillow embroidered with love and time, I cried with gratitude, because even though her voice had quieted, her stitching in me never came undone. Of all the stitches she taught me, the one that fascinated me most was the invisible stitch. This one's for when you don't want it to show, but you want it to last, she would say. She used it to close cushions, finish hems, hide mending. It was almost magical. On the outside, no one saw a thing. But inside, the fabric was secure, well-joined, strong. It's the stitch of trust, she'd say. Whoever sews like this believes that what's hidden also holds everything together. With time, I understood what she meant, because life is full of things that don't show, but still hold everything up. Like the gesture of making coffee before someone wakes up. Like the care of leaving a dry towel folded at the foot of the bed. Like the silence respected when someone's pain has no name. She stitched relationships like that, with invisible stitch, without fuss, without demands, just presence. And today, when someone asks how I learned to love with care, I answer, with invisible stitch. Love that doesn't show, but holds everything. And that's why, even if I don't talk about my grandmother every day, she lives on in me. In the little things, in simple gestures, in the way I hold the world. Because the stitch she left me can't be seen, but it's in everything I am. After time had passed and the grief had settled, my mother called me into the room. Come. It's time for you to keep your grandmother's sewing box. On the outside, a few marks from time. Inside, a whole world. There were spools of thread in all colors, some no longer even found in stores. There were needles stuck into a piece of felt, bent pins, buttons of all kinds, old ribbons, a rusty thimble, bits of zipper. I spent hours there, going through those items, breathing in the scent of the past, hearing the sound only she knew how to make when cutting fabric with her scissors. That box was an altar, not of religion, but of everyday faith, of care, of silent love. Today, it sits atop my wardrobe. Sometimes I open it just to breathe in the scent of time. And every time I pull a thread from there, I remember who I am and who stitched me with so much love. Time passes, and with it, many things fall apart. Fabric wears thin, stitches come undone, thread snaps. But some things remain, like the mark of those who stitched us from the inside. Today, when I look in the mirror, I don't just see my own features. I see hers, in the way I fix my hair, in how I fold my clothes, in the calm with which I stir the coffee, and most of all, in my hands. My hands aren't like hers, not yet, but they carry the way of touching the world that I learned from her. The care without rush, the silence that listens, the steadiness that embraces. She taught me that love is more than saying, "I love you." It's knowing how to hold. It's learning to stitch someone without invading. It's welcoming another's pain like someone who handles delicate fabric, without tearing it, without pulling too tightly. And when I think of everything I didn't manage to say to her in life, I remember she never needed to hear it, because her hands knew. Today, I go on stitching my own stories. I make mistakes. I redo seams. Sometimes I pull too tight. Sometimes I leave it too loose. But I keep trying. And every time someone sits beside me in silence, when I take someone's hand and offer presence, when I say stay without using my voice, I know it's not just me there. It's her hands through mine. Because there are people who make us whole. Not because they fix us, but because they stitch us with so much love that even our silences are healed. And I was one of the lucky ones. Some scars aren't visible on the skin, but those who know how to embroider know exactly where they live. My grandmother's hands didn't just sew dresses. They sewed people, and in every stitch, she left a bit of comfort, a bit of presence, a bit of faith. If this story reminded you of someone, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who once took care of you. With silence and sewing thread. In the next episode, you'll hear about the woman who wrote letters to her illiterate husband and hid them inside the clothes she sewed for him. A story about hidden love, patience, and words that time never erased. I'll see you there. And until then, may your silence find a place